A little while ago, we had the absolute pleasure of having Matt Greiner come into our shop to record a playthrough of the August Burns Red song, Invisible Enemy. We did this to promote his now completely sold out blast bell. If you haven't seen that video, check that out up here. As a videographer, I knew that the audio for this video had to be next level, so I invited in two friends to help me out with the audio while I ran the cameras. In this video, Tone Stevens is gonna break down some of the mics that he used on the drum kit, as well as dive a little bit into the recording process. And Tyler Sky is gonna go track by track and break down his entire mix. If you're interested in using these tracks to practice mixing drums, feel free to shoot me an email, aaron@tonetailors.com, and I'll send you the tracks. Without further ado, let's get into it.
So here we go. We used all DPA microphones. For the kick in, I used DPA's 2011C. And I'm gonna set this to the side real quick and come right back to it. Because for the snare top, I did something a little quirky. So I took my de facto and took the 4018 capsule out of it, and this is the 4018V. And in this little setup with the 2011 comes a different preamp. So pop that on there, added it to the clip, and mounted it to the front of the snare with one of the drum mic clips that I'll come back around to in a minute. As well as that, for toms we used the 4099, which is a classic. You can use it on horns, strings, but it's one of my favorites on toms. I use it on the snare bottom as well. Then for our overheads, I used another pair of 2011Cs. Now DPA has a ton of different options for clips. If I can figure out which way the zipper goes. And so I've had to use a bunch of these with the Velcro on to clips like the bottom of a snare stand. Here's your normal tom mic clip. And it's super versatile. Like, you can pop this out and shift it to be able to get almost anywhere you need to get around to. Fumbling a little bit here, but it's all good. You guys get the point. Violin clips for the 4099, but with this de facto option here, which you can also put any of their other capsules on, like you can pop the 2011C off and put that on there, and that's actually what came in this kit. But tons of different options. For the capture of it all, after the microphones, we used Waves LV1 so that I could give him a really solid monitoring option back to himself. And then we recorded into Waves Tracks Live. Most of you guys know I'm a Waves junkie, and for those who don't, now you do. That's about it, folks. But if you have any more questions, feel free to hit us up.
All right, here we are in Logic. I have the drums pulled up. The rest of the music tracks are hidden for now. It was a super simple setup. No surprises, just 8 mics. They were DPA mics, and Matt was a world-class drummer and has an amazing drum set, so it was a good recipe for good sounding raw tracks. So make sure you're listening with good headphones or studio monitors so you can really hear the difference when I turn things on and off. I'll play the unprocessed signal, and then I'll switch on all the processing. Here we go. All right, so let's jump in one by one. We'll start with the kick. The kick in. This is a metal project, so we really need the kick drum to be nice and punchy and short. So this is what our kick in sounds like on Processed. I'd say that was a pretty good source material for what we were going for. The first thing I did was pulled up this SSL EQ. All the emulations are great. On this day I was using the Waves version. Just boosting a little top end, a little mid-range here. Nothing crazy, just about 3 dB. And then at around 60, 70, I have a, just giving some nice low-end thump. And that sounds like this. With it off. So it's kind of just accentuating what we already captured. Just need a little more crack, a little more low end. Our next guy that I threw up was this transient designer. A lot of companies make good ones. I was using the Native Instruments one. Only thing I'm messing with here is the attack, just giving a little more oomph, a little more sharpness in the attack. And my final thing, I only had 3 simple plugins, was just taking off some ultra low end that we didn't need. So I will show you what the plugins and processing sound with the kick drum on and off. And now off. And something to think about as we go on is we don't listen in solo. We listen and make decisions based on what it sounds like in the whole mix. So as I'm doing this, I'm going back and unsoloing, figuring out what it sounds like cohesively. So that was our kick in, really getting the attack and basically the main sound of the kick drum. Our kick out is doing a nice simple job. This is what it sounds like. So obviously not as punchy as the kick in. I'm using this mic just to get some ultra lows and some sub material that I would then feather in with the kick in. So just kind of scooped out all the highs. I felt like we got a lot of information with the kick in, so I'm just using the kick out to supplement with some reinforcement of the low end. So together, unprocessed, they sound like this. And together, processed, they sound like this. Next in line, we have our snare. So I will play what we had, and then I'll start going through the processing. First thing I added was this plugin from Wilkinson Audio. It's kind of like a gate with a filter kind of thing. So when I turn it on, you'll hear some of the background noise disappear, because I know once we start adding processing, it's going to get it's going to bring up everything else with the bleed that we get from recording acoustic drums. So this is without, and this is with. Nothing crazy, but that's to set up for my EQ. So kind of the same ideology that we did with the kick, we're doing with the snare. Just boosting a lot of top end, not being scared, just what feels right. A lot of top end around 8K, and then a lot of low, kind of finding where the body and the real beefiness of the snare lies. So I'll play that unprocessed, and then I'll play it with it on. Here's it with it off. Here's it with it on. I feel like it's starting to fill out a little more and sound like a powerful snare. So next I'm going into a compressor. You can use any 1176 plugin. I'm using the Waves one here. So basically what I'm looking for here is to just add some excitement and some energy to the snare track. So I'll play what it sounds like off and then on. Here's it off. And here's it on. To me, it was definitely giving it that energy that I felt like it needed. After that, I used another transient designer, giving it a lot of smack and a little sustain, because the compressor might have choked a little bit, so I kind of just wanted to make the envelope a little longer. That makes sense? Envelope a little longer. This is with it off. And this is with it on. Right now, again, we're in solo, so things don't sound exactly natural until they're in the whole picture. So these next two plugins are really where the snare started to come to life. Again, as I'm mixing, I'm not really going linear like this and just putting all these plugins in solo. I start adding things in later down the process. So at some point down the road, I just needed to get more high end and crack and sizzle out of the snare drum. So these two combined really make up the sound. With this Pultec, we're just not being afraid. We're pretty much cranking it all the way at 8K. After that, we're going into this Moog EQ and we're bringing all that body back in and we're boosting even more top, and we're not being scared of how much we are boosting by. So here's both of them off, and then I'll turn them back on. And here's both plugins engaged. And right now that sounds crazy, but together it all makes sense. So next, usually when we record drums, get a snare top and bottom. First thing I did, once we started doing crazy EQ moves, I just felt like if I flipped the phase on the bottom snare, it actually worked out better for us. So usually that's pretty typical. I'll go back and play the snare raw so you can hear what flipping the phase sounded like. So this is with the snare top and snare bottom out of phase, and then I'll flip it back in. Here we go. When it's out of phase, it loses the body, it sounds hollow. So a way to check anything being out of phase is really listen to the low end and low mids to see if a lot of information is lost or gained. So we flipped the phase. Next thing I added, this is a surprise SSL channel strip. Kind of the same thing we did with the snare top. Boosted some top end, boosted some low end body. Pretty much the same frequency ranges. So I'll quickly play that on and off. Just trying to get the snare to be nice and fat. Going along with what we did the snare top and with the kick, just adding some more punch and sustain with this transient shaper. Again, as I mentioned before, as I go through the mix, things arise where, oh, I need a little more top end with the snare here, I need a little more bottom. So as the track progressed, I threw on this simple stock EQ, pretty broad as you can see. I just need a little more low meat energy, get rid of some nasty boxy mid stuff, and then just boosted some highs with a shelf. So this is with all processing off, and then I'll put it all on. And now on. I'll quickly play what the snare top and bottom sound like unprocessed, and then all the plugins enabled. And these are our plugins enabled. So the final thing for the snare is I have it being sent to a bus where I have a reverb. So this is the stock Logic reverb. You can use anything. I'm going for a plate sound here. They had a nice sounding plate with the snare plate preset. Not big on the whole preset thing, but if it sounds good, it sounds good. And then I tweaked different parameters to fit the song. So next we have toms. He has 3 of them, and they are tuned to the song. This is what all 3 of them sound like unprocessed. So one thing in tom mixing that you can do is you can go and cut out all the spaces where there are no toms playing, which makes sense, especially in a metal setting. Maybe if it's a more indie rock kind of thing, you want to leave that in. In this particular thing, this isn't exactly a studio recording. This isn't going on an album. We recorded it in the music store. So it sounded good. I kept the bleed in. So that was just the decision I made. So we have the SSL channel up on all the toms, kind of a similar thing, boosting some top end, boosting some low end, and hunting around for some boxy stuff. So normally toms and you're anywhere from like 5 to 300, there's some unfriendly frequencies that you kind of want to get rid of. You don't necessarily need them. You don't have to go crazy on cuts. Sometimes you want to. In this case, just a little 3 dB overall. This is what the toms sound like unprocessed. And this is what they sound like processed with the SSL EQ. So the final thing with the toms is I just added some EQ, getting rid of some ultra lows out of there. So just kind of a little final cleanup thing. So same thing with the snares, we're sending our toms to the reverb bus. So last but not least, our overheads. And I mentioned before that we were using DPA microphones, so they captured a true representation of what the drums sounded like on this day in our room. This is what our overheads sound like unprocessed. And no surprise here, what did we go with? We started with the SSL channel strip, bringing out some nice highs, making it nice and crispy. And we're actually adding a lot of low end here where we kind of found our snare around 200 or a little less than that. So we're kind of just giving the overhead some nice fatness. So a lot of people, the first thing they do that I've seen is they'll get rid of all the low end in their overheads, but your overheads really capture the drum set, and you want to give that as much body because that's where a lot of your sound is coming from. So I don't want to thin out any sounds. I want to just accentuate some body and top end. So that's what we did here. With the SSL on, and as you can see on some of these, I have the compressor section engaged, just kind of hitting the loudest things and keeping the very dynamic drum performance nice and where we want it. So as the mix went on and things got added and changed, I just needed a lot of high brilliance added to the final sound. So I boosted even more top end. So this is the real nice sheen. So all together, our overheads sound like this. So right now we're in a good place. We've kind of gone through every track. We have all our processing, which together sounds like this. But there's one last step in the process that you can do. In this case, I bust all individual drum tracks to a main drum bus. And in Logic, you have these track stacks, so it kind of puts it in a nice folder for you. A lot of DAWs are doing this now. It makes sense to me. So I have my drum bus up here in its own track, and I'll go through some of the subtle or not so subtle things that I did that added up to make the final drum sound. At the time, I had just gotten some Sound Toys plugins, and I really wanted to test them out. So using this radiator, which is based off a really cool vintage unit where the main purpose is you want to drive it, you want to get that overdriven and saturation sounds. So that's what I did. And it has a little 2-band EQ, giving more treble, more bass, kind of reoccurring theme here, kind of giving it maybe a little smiley face kind of vibe. So I'll play Unprocessed, and about a couple seconds in, I'll turn on and engage the radiator, and you'll kind of see what it does. You'll hear what it does. So I'm doing a bunch of little moves that I think add up in a really cool way. After that, I'm sticking with the SSL theme, and I'm going right to the SSL compressor, which we all know and love. This is what it sounds like with the SSL engaged. I'll turn it on. It is adding some gain, so it did get a little louder, but for me, I hate to say it because you hear it everywhere, but it kind of adds that glue and brings it all together. But with that being said, it really just makes it a little more exciting, makes it a little more lively to me. For this last EQ move, you could have used anything. I could have used the most expensive plugin in the world, but I just went with the stock. It was a quick move I wanted to do in the time, so when you're working your move and you just want to use what works, and the stock plugin works more than fine. So this move here is just a little low bump. You could kind of say it's a Pultec style move where you're kind of cutting and boosting a little bit, boosting where you had cut. I think in a Pultec style EQ, it actually would kind of dip a little bit. Let me know in the comments, but I think that's what a real one actually would do. So that's the idea that we kind of want to do: cut and boost. And again, with the Sound Toys plugin, we added Decapitator. This is a fan favorite, super popular plugin, and for good reason. Just If you want saturation and cool artistic fun, then this is the plugin for you. My goal with this was just adding some more weight and kind of what the meter says here, the attitude. So I really wanted to make the drums just a little more exciting. So if I can just add a little bit with a couple plugins, it all adds together to make a good final sound. I'll engage the decapitator to show you what it sounds like. So the last thing in the bus processing was a super popular technique called parallel compression, New York style compression. I'm sure you've heard it, I'm sure you've done it, I'm sure you will try it. This isn't something I do or I live by, but on this day, I wanted to try it, it worked, I went with it. So another 1176, you can use any one you want. So for the final step, I'm looking for an ultra compressed signal that I will fade in with the original dry signal. So I have the fastest attack, I have the fastest release, have it on all buttons in mode, which is an extreme compression setting. So then I just feather that into the original signal, and the end product should be, it adds more energy, it adds more life, it adds more, it just smacks harder. So parallel compression, here we go. This is with it off, and then I'll turn it on. So I'm doing all these little moves to slowly get more energy, more excitement, to hit harder, and I think they all add up to really showcase Matt's drumming in a great way. So there we have it, Matt Greiner's drum playthrough of Invisible Enemy by August Burns Red. It was great to have him come in the shop. We had great drum set, we had great mics, and of course we had a world-class drummer. So all those elements really make the final product that much more special. So that was my process, and that is how I mixed. Let me know what you would do differently. What plugins do you like using? What plugins do you want to try? You don't have to use a million plugins on a mix, so as you can see in here, I just used a handful. So what works for you? If you like this video, please give a thumbs up and subscribe. Catch you next time.